Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kurt Schroeder. I'm the Chief Experience Officer with Avtech Solutions. Welcome to our third and final webinar in our series around could and should. In other words, how to distinguish what's going on in the CX marketplace. Today, we're going to be covering a specific case study of an organization that used a CX approach to determine what they should do in selecting various CX technologies and how that all comes together in a platform that supports the customer experience. This past week, I had the pleasure of speaking at a Chief Customer Officer conference in Miami, and frankly, being out of Minnesota, it was a welcome relief to be down in some warmth. But it was fascinating because many people were talking about trying to select a CX platform, and the narrow definition that they had around that seemed to suggest what we've been seeing in the marketplace, that many people are trying to jump on that CX bandwagon. It was a good conference, and the results of it really were telling in the sense that there is still confusion out there in the marketplace just by the number of organizations that are jumping on this bandwagon. And we covered that in our very first webinar, is the number of products, the number of vendors that are all claiming to be a CX platform, but in reality offer just one slice or one sliver of what we think is a complete holistic platform. If you recall from our second webinar that we did in this series, we really identified what we believe is 5 categories of platforms that are in the market that have CX in their capabilities. And it really comes out to be these 5 different capabilities. The first one is tracing and mapping, which is can we trace the current experience or the experience that customers are having with us, and does it support how we map that experience today? The second category of platform is really around how do we evaluate the current experience through feedback, through voice of customer, through data collection. The third platform category that we see is really orchestration. So how do we orchestrate the experience across the multiple channels that we're providing our customers, and can we do that in a way that actually provides an omni-channel experience? The fourth category of platform that we see is around customer management. Do we collect and expose the information that we have about the customer and their experience to the various touch points within the organization? And then finally, analytics. And analytics as a platform is around, how do we equate the customer's interactions with us, whether that's through face-to-face or their digital body language, and how does that equate to what they do with us transactionally? And so really creating an ROI story and being able to analyze that through analytics. And finally, the last webinar, we also talked about, an approach to make sure you're making the right decisions around the CX technology investments that you're making. And we made the argument that says, in order to understand that, you have to really begin with the customer experience definition and then decide how you're going to enable that. I was on a call this morning talking about that very specific thing, that we need to work from the customer experience backwards. In a previous life, I used to work at GE, and I tell people I'm a recovering Six Sigma black belt. And so as we know, Six Sigma is very much about process efficiency. And many times, in the last 10, 15 years, we have gotten really good at process design, process efficiency, and squeezing out waste within processes. And then once we've done that, we then ask the question, well, how do we need the customer to fit into that process that we've defined? I think what I'm suggesting is that we need to start differently and start with the experience defining what does that need to look like, and then asking the question, well, therefore, what is an effective and efficient process need to look like in order to support that experience that we've defined. And so we're really kind of migrating towards turning this idea of process efficiency on its head and saying that really should be subordinate to the overall experience. What also should be subordinate to that overall experience that we define in design is what are the technology capabilities that we need then to support it, versus buying in some kind of technology and then using that then to define the experience. And so along those lines, what the member experience definition looks like becomes very important, and it really defines who the customer is or the member is, identifies what the customer's needs are, and then through whether it's design thinking or human-centered design or other experience design techniques or methodologies, defines what does that experience need to be then to meet the needs of that customer, and then finally defines what capabilities are needed to deliver that experience. Once those capabilities are defined, then we can take a look at what our current capabilities are, identify the gaps against the needed capabilities, and understand what solutions might be available to help close those gaps, and then finally deploy those. And that really comes together then to support the overall customer experience. And so what I want to do over the next couple minutes is really share with you an end-to-end approach that we deployed in helping a specific client and tell you what that case study looks like. And so as we blow that model up, it really comes down to an internal view and an external view. And starting with the external view, we need to be able to define who the customer is, what the segments are, what their profiles look like or personas look like, and what is the value proposition that we want to deliver to those that really defines what the experience looks like. And then internally, being able to understand how do we support those desired interactions, what are the capabilities we need then to support those interactions, and how do we then deploy those things and execute against them. And as we know, there's a number of tools and methods that we would use to further support that. On the external side, using voice of customer, whether it's quantitative or qualitative research, using ethnographic research, using segmentation and persona models, and then really understanding where we are in our maturity around delivering and executing on that experience. Things like journey mapping becomes really important because we can look at the visualization of the experience through journey maps and then use that as a mechanism to design the desired experience through design thinking or using other tools that might be from the Six Sigma tool set, such as Kano model analysis, etc. And so really this model then becomes the roadmap of how we make good decisions from an experience perspective to decide what we should do versus what we could do in deploying customer experience technologies. And it's important for us to remember that this is not a one and done exercise. This is a continual adventure. It's a continual process. It's a continual set of competencies and capabilities that you should have as an organization. This is how you should start approaching, especially front-facing interactions with your customers. This is how you should approach making those decisions. And so this isn't about journey mapping or voice of customer to solve problems. It's really about understanding what does that experience design need to look like, and then how do we support it with enabling capabilities and technologies. And so if we do that and we do that correctly, we can really move towards a true omni-channel experience for our customers. It was interesting at this conference I was at, many people talked about wanting to allow the customer to interact with them through whatever channel the customer prefers, which is a great ideal. It's a great goal to have. However, unless those channels are connected in a way that really provides visibility to the organization across whatever channel the customer provides, then I'm not so sure that you're really improving the customer experience versus just giving them multiple ways to touch you. And by the way, the word channel is never something that a customer says. Instead, the customer will always say, well, I contacted you. And then they will describe, well, how? I sent you an email. I sent you, a text. I called you. I met with you. They describe the interaction in a way that says, I reached out to you, I touched you, and they don't necessarily recognize the differences between channels. And so being able to make sure that we're supporting a model that is omni-channel enabled becomes important. The other couple things that's important to understand, that makes this work, this process, very much a cross-functional and cross-channel teams. Most of the times our channels are managed by different groups simply because it was a different set of technologies that enabled that channel, and we managed it in silos. We need to break that down and make sure we're making funding decisions based on the entirety of the experience, not just based on how one channel is involved in the experience versus another. And again, all this is really aimed at helping us understand what we should do to improve not only the customer experience, but also the employee experience as well. Many times when I speak at conferences, I'll talk about the difference between two critical attributes that should be associated in every single interaction, and those two attributes are competency, are you good at what you say you're good at, and warmth, are you authentically and genuinely warm to me as a customer. What we know is competency trumps warmth. And so the more that we can enable our employees to be able to answer questions, to be able to help the customer, and do that in a way that is seamless to the employee, it becomes seamless to the customer as well. But that also improves the employee experience and allows them to focus more on warmth than trying to be competent. So to our case study. So let me set the table a little bit for this. This was a very large regional bank that to date had really kind of haphazardly put together their contact center to support the customer. And so they were looking at, centralizing this and trying to understand what does a good contact center look like that is going to have a high degree of competency and a high degree of warmth. They were known in terms of from their customer base as being a very engaging, personal banking experience, and they wanted to be able to maintain that. So the first thing we did is really say who are your customers? What is their personas? What does that persona need? What are they thinking about, or what we call what is the mindset, which is really what are they trying to do and what are they thinking about when they're interacting with you? And so we really did quite a bit of research in defining that out. And so we looked at the data so that we understood when a certain persona reaches out to the bank, what do they care about the most? What are they most of the time calling about? What is their mindset when they're calling? Are they anxious? So for an example, we may have a persona that is 64, 65 years old, and on the third Thursday of every month, they call the bank because that's when their Social Security check gets deposited. And they want to make sure that money is available because they have bills to pay. So this could be a persona that maybe is not necessarily living check to check, but understanding what's in their account at any given time becomes very important to them. So this idea of a persona that is always checking, their deposits, or at least their Social Security deposit, becomes important. That may apply to a younger demographic as well. So trying to understand what is the persona, what do they need, who are they, what are their typical banking activities, then really helps us understand and helps design what the experience might be like. And so once we understand who the customer is, then we can understand what do they want, and we can map their journey, and we can see where their pain points are as they're trying to accomplish what they want and what their needs are. And so this idea of pain point identification, mindset development, and mapping the current state journey becomes very important. And the part of this that is important is because we're collecting data and we're building empathy to really understand what are their needs. And needs really fall into two groups. One attribute of the need is what I call functional. So what do I, as a customer, need to achieve with you functionally? I need to get my deposit information. That's the functional need. But then there's always an emotional need that's associated with that. Many times we ignore that emotional need. And so we also want to not only understand what their functional need is, but we want to understand what their emotional need is, and being able to map that out on the journey, on the current state journey, and visualize that so that we can build empathy across the organization for that particular persona and the experience that we're providing them. Then once we understand that, we can then start propagating that through the organization and start having people think about, well, what could the experience be? How do we deliver a positive experience to that persona, which then really leads us to experience, innovation, and design. And so using techniques around ideation, experience design, design thinking, and really driving to a future state map. And so a number of tools can come into play here as we think about what does that future state look like, what are they trying to achieve, and what's the value proposition that we're going to be able to give them. And so concentrating on these pain points and also the moments that matter. So a moment that matters is just simply an interaction that, depending on how you perform against that interaction, my interpretation of you is either going to go negative or going to go positive. It will never stay neutral, it will never stay the same, because it's that important of an interaction. So we concentrate on both pain points and moments that matter and ideate around that to help us understand what are the solutions that we could bring to bear, and then drive that into a future state journey map so we can visualize that future state experience, and then from that being able to define what are the capabilities then I need to solve that. And that's really then the switch to the right-hand side of the equation that I showed earlier, is now we're going to start thinking internally and work externally. And so really identifying these capabilities and putting them into what we call a fit matrix. And so that's just simply saying, how does our current technology platforms solve some of these things, and how does it fit into that? And do we need additional technologies? Do we need integration? What are the dependencies? So now we're starting to really map out this gap analysis or fit matrix to say, given the capabilities that we need, what do we have today? How does it fit against that? And do we need other capabilities that we need to be able to support via technology, or are there capabilities that we don't have any technology support for today? And so that becomes very important in understanding how do we leverage our current technology portfolio and seeing where the important gaps are. This then answers the question, what else do we need to be able to support the experience? And it also then defines what kind of CX platform should we be looking at. Should we be looking at an orchestration platform, or should we be looking at a voice of customer or a feedback and voice of customer capture platform? So it really starts defining what kind of platform should I be looking at in that CX environment. And then finally, we can really say, all right, how do we then, once we understand what the gaps are and how we're going to fill those gaps to support the various CX capabilities, we can then begin looking at how do we then deploy this. And we do that through roadmaps and through project charters, where we can take a look at each solution, how we support a capability, and based on that, create a charter that can turn into an initiative that describes how we're going to solve for this capability, what does the solution look like, and using the tried and true people, process, and technology approach, define what that looks like in broad details. And then put that on a roadmap with timing. We try to make it simple, and we kind of use the now, next, later. So what are we going to do from 0 to 6 months? What are we going to do from 6 to 12? And what are we going to do from 12 months on in order to accomplish this? So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and how we layer in and build out these capabilities becomes important, because there will be interdependency between the capabilities as we build them out. And the purpose of the project charter is to really remind the business and technology teams of why are we doing this, how does it support the future state journey map, and how do we finally accomplish the enablement of the overall journey itself. And so we did this for a large regional bank, took them through this process. They're now in the process of implementing the now, next, later roadmap. So it defined a roadmap with ties back to, therefore, this will support the experience that we designed. We were able to attach capabilities to specific technology decisions that they needed to make, and now they're in the process of executing. And so this all really starts back towards, the CX marketplace is very crowded. There's key platforms that exist that are very, very important and very capable that you need to be aware of. But making the choice, deciding what you should do versus what you could do, really needs to start with the experience that you want to deliver. Therefore, what are the capabilities that you need to have? And then what's the roadmap then to execute on those capabilities? One quick footnote on this. If you do have to decide to bring on additional capabilities that are new into your environment, a standard vendor selection process will work fine, as long as you continually tie it back to the future state experience that you're trying to deliver. And so that concludes the webinar series around could versus should. Hopefully this has been beneficial for you. Hopefully we've equipped you with a model that you can deploy into your own organizations. And we're excited to continue this webinar series. So look for the next invitation, a new topic that's going to be important around customer experience and the enablement of those experiences that you're trying to differentiate yourself on for your organizations. I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you attending the webinar series that I've hosted over the last couple months here, and I really look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a great day, and I think we're close enough, I can say, and a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much. Have a good day.